I used to work as a nurse on the night shift at a small hospital outside the city. It was 2018, I was 32, and my routine was practically the same every day. Leaving work at 3 in the morning and driving almost an hour to get home. Despite the exhaustion, I liked the road at that hour. It was quiet, almost therapeutic. The darkness and the hum of the car engine helped me sort through my thoughts after hours of dealing with emergencies and patients. But that night, something changed. Honestly, I still can't forget what happened. My car was an old sedan, but it had always been reliable. It had never let me down before. That is, until that night. I was about 20 minutes from home when the engine started making a strange noise, a kind of hissing mixed with choking sounds. My stomach tightened instantly. There weren't any gas stations nearby and my phone battery was running low. I managed to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway, right next to a curve where the road disappeared into dense trees. The silence I once loved suddenly felt oppressive, heavy. The only light came from my car's headlights and the moon, which seemed dimmer than usual that night. I tried calling roadside assistance, but the signal was weak. After several frustrating attempts, I finally got through. The operator assured me that a tow truck would arrive within 40 minutes. I decided to wait in the car, locking the doors just to be safe. Even though the road was deserted, I'd heard enough stories to know it wasn't wise to take chances. As I glanced at the rearview mirror, something caught my attention. A car parked about 50 yards behind me. It was an old, beat-up sedan, the kind you'd only see in old movies, with peeling paint and one headlight out. I swear it wasn't there when I stopped. At first I thought it might just be a coincidence. Maybe the driver had pulled over for the same reason I had, car trouble or something like that. But as time passed I noticed something strange. There was no movement from the car. No lights turned on. No doors opened. Nothing. Yet I felt like I was being watched. I can't explain it, but there was a tension in the air, as if that car had a presence of its own. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. After all, I was tired, and the darkness could play tricks on anyone's mind. I tried to distract myself. I turned on the radio, but it was out of tune, only emitting static. I turned it off quickly. The sound made the unease even worse. I looked at my phone, but the battery was down to 8%. I wanted to save enough power to take the call from the tow truck. Every passing minute, that sedan seemed stranger. It was as if there was a pattern in the way its headlights reflected on my rearview mirror. Something that made my heart race, even though I couldn't pinpoint why. I forced myself to look ahead, avoiding the mirror. But the feeling of being watched lingered, like invisible eyes burning into the back of my neck. I decided I needed to be sure. I cracked my window just a little, enough to listen to my surroundings, but everything was eerily silent. No sounds of crickets, no rustling in the trees. Just the faint hum of my engine, now off. I took a deep breath and, against my instincts, turned to look directly at the car through the rearview mirror. That's when I noticed something that made my throat go dry. There was someone inside. A dark silhouette, motionless, sitting in the driver's seat. I couldn't make out any details, but the simple fact that someone was there filled me with dread. They hadn't gotten out of the car, hadn't made any movements. They were just there, watching me. My mind started racing. Who was this person? Why weren't they asking for help if they'd been parked there for so long? Part of me wanted to step out and confront them, but the more rational part told me to stay put. It felt like that car was a trap, something waiting for any action on my part to react. I grabbed my phone and tried calling roadside assistance again, but the call dropped before it connected. My heart was pounding now, and the air inside the car felt thick and stifling. I started staring at the clock on the dashboard, praying for the tow truck to arrive quickly. Then something even more unsettling happened. While watching through the mirror, the faint light from a distant street lamp revealed a small movement. The silhouette in the car leaned forward slightly as if trying to get a better look at me. My chest tightened, and I felt frozen in place. I was like a mouse trapped, being studied by a predator. At that moment, any doubts I had about the situation vanished. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and every passing second felt like a step closer to a fate I didn't want to face. I knew I needed to stay calm, but my body felt like it was in full panic mode. My hands were shaking and my breathing sounded far too loud inside the car. That's when I noticed something that made my fear spike even more. The sedan was closer. Not by much, maybe by a few feet, but enough to tell it had moved. And yet I hadn't heard the engine start or the sound of tires on the asphalt. It was as if it had silently slid closer, like a predator stalking its prey. My mind scrambled for logical explanations, but none of them made sense. I checked the clock on the dashboard again. Only 5 minutes had passed since I last looked, but it felt like an eternity. Time seemed to have slowed, trapping me in that moment. Then I saw something through the rear-view mirror that nearly made me scream. A hand, pale and thin, resting on the sedan's steering wheel. It was motionless, but it was now visible, illuminated faintly by the glow of my taillights. My stomach churned. It wasn't the kind of hand I expected to see. It looked wrong somehow. Too long, with fingers that bent in a way that didn't seem natural. For the first time, I felt hot tears running down my face. The fear was consuming me. I sat there frozen, trying to decide what to do. Getting out of the car was out of the question, but staying put felt unbearable. I grabbed my phone again, this time typing a quick message to a friend who lived nearby. The text was simple. "Something weird is happening. If I don't respond, call the police." I hit send just before the battery finally died, leaving me completely cut off. My only hope was the tow truck, and I started silently praying it would get there in time. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I saw the lights of a vehicle approaching in the distance. The tow truck. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong I nearly cried again. But what the sedan did next unsettled me even more. As soon as the tow truck's lights appeared, the car behind me turned on its headlights and sped off abruptly, disappearing around the curve in the road. I didn't dare look back as it passed me. All I could think was, how long had that person been there, and why? When the tow truck pulled up beside me, the driver, an older man with a gray beard and a baseball cap, stepped out calmly. He seemed completely unaware of the panic I was in, but to me, he was like an angel at that moment. I stumbled out of my car and rushed to him, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. He gave me a skeptical but concerned look, shaking his head as he inspected my car. "Maybe it was just someone stopping to rest," he said, trying to reassure me, but I knew it wasn't that. As he hooked up my car to the tow truck, I couldn't stop glancing down the road where the sedan had disappeared. The highway was empty again, as if nothing had happened. But the feeling of being watched was still there, lingering like an invisible weight on my shoulders. I asked the driver if he'd seen the other car, but he just shrugged. "Didn't see anything on my way here," he replied. That sent a chill down my spine. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The hand, the movement, the way the car vanished. It was real. The ride home was silent as I sat in the passenger seat, trying to process everything. The driver talked about common issues on the road, trying to make small talk, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time he slowed down or took a turn, I found myself glancing at the rear-view mirror, expecting to see the sedan again. But it never showed. We made it to my house safely, and the driver even helped push my car into the garage. Before leaving, he gave me his card and told me to call if I ever needed help again. I thanked him, but I knew this wasn't something he could fix. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. I've talked to friends, read stories online, even researched that stretch of road to see if it had any strange history. Nothing. It's like it was a moment lost in time, something only I witnessed. I've never driven that part of the highway alone again, and every time I think of that hand on the steering wheel, the same chill runs down my spine. Maybe I'll never know what really happened that night, but one thing's for sure, it's an experience I'll never forget. I used to work as a pizza delivery driver during college. It was one of those jobs that helped pay the bills, especially since I could work at night after classes. This happened on a Friday night around 10 p.m. I remember feeling tired but relieved because I only had 2 more deliveries before my shift ended. Back then, I used one of those apps that mapped out routes, so getting lost was rare. But that night, something felt off from the start. The delivery was for a house I'd never seen before, on a street that barely showed up on GPS. Getting there was strange enough. The address was in a more remote neighborhood, one of those areas where the houses are far apart and the streetlights are few and far between. As I drove, the streetlights became scarcer, and the silence was almost tangible. When I finally spotted the house, I felt confused. It didn't look like a place someone would live in. The windows were boarded up, and there were signs of construction everywhere. Ripped bags of cement, tools scattered in the yard. The house number was crooked, but it was definitely the right address. I tried shaking off the weird feeling. Maybe the customer's renovating and still living here, I thought. I grabbed the pizza and walked to the door, which looked old and worn, like it hadn't been opened in years. I rang the doorbell, but there was no sound. I knocked on the door and waited. Nothing. That's when I decided to call the customer's number. The phone rang twice before going straight to voicemail. By this point, I was starting to feel uneasy. The silence around the house was different, heavy. I tried listening for any signs of life inside. Footsteps, voices, even a TV or radio. But all I heard was the wind. Then a faint dragging noise broke the silence, coming from somewhere inside. "Hello? Pizza delivery," I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. No response. I looked around, considering just leaving the pizza on the porch and getting out of there, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the idea of not completing the delivery properly, or maybe it was the growing curiosity. Then I did something I'd never normally do. I pushed the door. To my surprise, it was unlocked and creaked open with a long, low groan. When the door opened, the smell that came from inside the house hit me first. It wasn't exactly rotten, but it was strange, like damp wood mixed with decades of accumulated dust. The interior was dark, and the only light came from a distant street lamp outside. The living room looked like a construction site. Aluminum ladders, plastic sheets covering old furniture, and even some unfinished walls. I kept calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here? I've got your pizza." The only answer was silence, but that dragging noise from before sounded a little louder now, coming from somewhere upstairs. I should have left right then and there, but something told me to stay. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the thought that this was just some misunderstanding. I climbed 2 steps of the staircase, calling out again. My voice echoed in a way that didn't feel right, as if the house was bigger on the inside than it looked from the outside. When I placed my foot on the 3rd step, the noise suddenly stopped. I froze for a few seconds, my heart pounding, trying to decide whether to go up or leave. That's when I heard something crystal clear. A whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it sounded like it came from the top of the stairs. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a human voice. Maybe it was the customer, I thought, but why were they whispering? "Hello? Are you up there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no reply. I took a step back, feeling like someone was watching me. My instincts screamed that something was wrong, so I decided to leave the pizza on the bottom step and get out of there. Just as I turned to leave, I heard a loud crash, like something heavy falling upstairs. That was the breaking point. I ran out the door without looking back. When I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly that it took a few seconds to fit the key into the ignition. I started the engine, ready to drive away as fast as I could, but something made me glance back at the house. On the second floor, where one of the windows wasn't boarded up, I saw a figure standing there. It was impossible to make out a face because of the dim light, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Someone was watching me, completely still. I blinked once, and the figure was gone. My heart nearly stopped at that moment. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the image of that figure in the window was burned into my mind. It wasn't a shadow or a reflection. It was someone. Without thinking twice, I slammed on the gas and drove away as fast as I could. As I sped through the dark streets of the neighborhood, I tried to calm myself and think rationally. Maybe it was the customer, someone working on the renovation, or even some stupid prank. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Who orders a pizza to a place like that at that time of night? And why wouldn't they answer the door? I made it back to the restaurant, still shaken. My co-workers noticed how pale and agitated I was. I told them what had happened, but no one seemed to take it seriously. "It was probably just someone working on the house," one of them said, laughing. But when I showed the address to the manager, his expression changed. "That place?" he asked, frowning. "I'm pretty sure it's been abandoned for years." He went on to explain that he'd heard rumors about the house being bought for renovation, but the work stopped after strange things started happening. Tools went missing, noises came from upstairs, and workers refused to return. That night when I got home, everything felt heavier. I locked every door and window and lay in bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that figure in the window flashed back into my mind. I spent hours wondering what might have happened if I'd gone upstairs. Was it really a person? Or something I wasn't supposed to see? I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. To this day, I avoid talking about that delivery. Whenever I see an order for a strange address, I feel a chill run down my spine. I quit delivering pizzas a few weeks later and chalked it up to coincidence. But every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a sensation that stayed with me ever since that night. The worst part? I've never been able to shake one final question. If that figure in the window had been there all along, who placed the order? I've never been one to believe in bizarre or supernatural stories, but what happened to me that summer night in 2017 still gives me chills every time I think about it. I was driving alone on a deserted road in rural Kansas. It was the kind of trip I'd take to clear my head, you know? Back then, my life was a mess. I had just quit a job I hated, my relationship was falling apart, and all I wanted was some peace. So I hit the road in my old Corolla, with no real destination in mind. The trip had been smooth so far, but I couldn't shake the discomfort of not having seen a gas station in almost an hour. My tank was practically empty, and the thought of being stranded on that road with no cell service wasn't exactly appealing. After a few more minutes, I spotted a flickering sign in the distance. "Gas," it read, in partially burned-out red letters. The place looked ancient, like it had been there since the 70s and never been updated. But at that moment, it was my only option. I pulled up to the station and parked next to the only pump that seemed operational. There were no other cars, no signs of life anywhere around. It was eerie, but the silence made it feel even more surreal. As I started pumping gas, I noticed someone watching me. I glanced up and saw the attendant standing behind the store's glass window. He was a thin man with thinning gray hair, wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit. What unsettled me was the way he was staring. Frozen, wide-eyed, like he was seeing something terrifying. I tried to ignore it and focus on filling up, but that unblinking gaze started to really get to me. Once I was done, I walked to the store to pay, but as I approached, the attendant suddenly jumped and locked the door right in front of me. He began gesturing wildly, pointing at me and then toward the road. I was completely baffled. He looked frantic, like he was trying to warn me about something. I motioned that I needed to pay, but he just shook his head and kept pointing, urging me to leave. My first thought was that he was out of his mind, but something in his expression gave me a sinking feeling in my stomach. That whole situation threw me off, but I decided not to argue. I went back to my car, still trying to process what had just happened. As I closed the gas cap and returned the pump handle, I glanced back at the store. The attendant was still there, staring at me with those same wide, terrified eyes. But now, he was pointing behind me, his face even more panicked. My heart started racing. I spun around quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the empty road and the dark silhouette of the trees surrounding the station. I got in the car and hit the gas, eager to put some distance between myself and that place. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I watched as the gas station disappeared into the darkness. Yet, that creeping feeling of something being very wrong wouldn't leave me. My whole body felt tense, as if I was bracing for something I couldn't see. It was a primal instinct, that eerie sense of being watched, even when you know you're alone. About 5 minutes later, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. 2 headlights in the distance. It wasn't unusual to come across other cars, but the way those lights followed me made me uneasy. I sped up a little, thinking they'd pass or fall back, but they didn't. They matched my speed exactly, staying the same distance behind me. That's when I started to feel genuinely scared. Who the hell would be following me this late on such an isolated road? I slowed down, hoping they'd overtake me, but they didn't. Instead, they slowed down too. I quickly turned off onto a narrow side road, one of those barely marked paths that don't even show up on most maps. For a moment I thought I'd lost them. But not long after, those same headlights appeared again, this time much closer. My chest tightened, my heart pounding like a drum. Something was very wrong, and I knew I had to get away as fast as possible. I floored the accelerator, trying to put as much distance as I could between me and whoever was in that car. The side road was full of twists and potholes, and the steering wheel vibrated in my hands with every bump. The headlights behind me didn't just keep up, they were getting closer. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Who was driving that car? What did they want from me? And why had the gas station attendant been so desperate for me to leave? After a few miles, I came across a split in the road. Without hesitation, I turned sharply to the left, killed my headlights, and parked the car behind a cluster of trees that lined the road. I sat there in total silence, engine off, trying to steady my breathing. My plan was to wait until the car passed so I could escape in the other direction. But seconds turned into minutes, and there was no sound of an engine, no sign of lights. It was like the car had vanished into thin air. After a few more nerve-wracking minutes, I finally summoned the courage to start the car and drive back toward the main road. My whole body was trembling, and sweat was dripping down my face. Everything seemed too quiet now, almost unnaturally so. Just as I started to think the worst was over, the headlights appeared again in the rearview mirror, this time much faster and even closer than before. There was no doubt about it now. Whoever was in that car wasn't just following me. They were hunting me. This time, I didn't try to outsmart them. My only option was to drive as fast as I could toward the nearest sign of civilization. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a small town in the distance. Lights, a few houses, and even a police station. I turned straight into the parking lot of the station and screeched to a stop. Before I could even get out of the car, I checked the rearview mirror. The headlights were gone. The car that had been following me had completely disappeared. I rushed inside, still shaking and out of breath, and told the officer on duty everything that had happened. He listened, but gave me a skeptical look. He said that road had a weird reputation, and that other people had reported strange encounters there before, but no one had ever found any real evidence. He advised me to rest and avoid that area in the future. To this day, I have no idea what happened that night or who or what was in that car. But one thing's for sure, I'll never drive on that road again no matter what. I've never been the superstitious type or one to believe in ghost stories. I'm a practical guy, you know. I've worked as a traveling salesman for nearly a decade, which means countless nights in cheap motels with questionable breakfasts and rock-hard mattresses. It was September 2016. I remember because it was the height of the sales season, and my route had me bouncing between small, forgotten towns. After driving over 12 hours straight, I was completely spent. When I spotted that roadside motel, with its flickering neon sign reading "Rooms Available," I knew I had no choice. I needed to crash for the night. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a cheap motel in the middle of nowhere. The lobby smelled like mildew, and the desk clerk, a thin, older man with sallow skin and tired eyes, seemed more invested in the TV show he was watching than in checking me in. He handed me the key to room 12, located at the end of an exterior hallway. The room itself was basic: a double bed with thin sheets, a scratched-up wooden desk, and an old boxy TV that made a strange buzzing noise even when turned off. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't care. I just needed a few hours of sleep. As soon as I tossed my bag on the floor and laid down, I felt my body melt into the mattress. I didn't even bother taking off my shoes. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to an odd noise. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but no, it was real. There was a rhythmic tapping sound coming from the wall next to the bed. It was faint, like someone was using their fingertips. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was so steady that it pulled me completely out of my grogginess. Must be the guest in the room next door, I thought. I was used to dealing with noisy neighbors, arguing couples, blaring TVs, but what I heard next made my skin crawl. Muffled crying. It sounded like a woman, her sobs restrained, almost desperate. I froze, straining my ears to make sure I wasn't imagining things. After a few minutes, I worked up the nerve to knock on the wall. "Hey, is everything okay over there?" My voice came out shakier than I intended. The crying stopped immediately. No response, just silence. I waited a little longer, but when nothing happened, I decided I should let the front desk know. I got dressed quickly, my heart pounding harder than I liked to admit. The hallway was dimly lit, with flickering bulbs that buzzed in the quiet. When I reached the front desk, the clerk barely looked up from the TV. I awkwardly explained what I'd heard, trying not to sound paranoid. He gave me a blank, almost dismissive look and said, "The room next to yours is empty. Nobody's checked into room 11 tonight." I let out a nervous laugh, thinking maybe the old man just didn't want to deal with me, but something about his tone unsettled me. "Are you sure? Because I clearly heard tapping and crying." He shrugged and pointed to an open logbook on the counter. Sure enough, there was no name listed for room 11. "Look, these walls are thin. You probably heard something from outside or maybe even from the room across the hall," he suggested. But the way his eyes avoided mine didn't sit right. I mumbled a thank you and headed back to my room, still feeling uneasy. As I walked back, I glanced at the door to room 11. It looked just like mine. Chipped paint, a crooked number painted on the wood. I felt a strange urge to try the handle, but the thought of getting caught snooping stopped me. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe I was overly tired. I turned off the lights and lay down again, but sleep wouldn't come. Every little noise, the wind brushing against the trees outside, the hum of the TV, felt amplified. The unsettling sense of being watched crept over me, and I found myself glancing at the walls and the door, half expecting something to appear. Around 3:00 a.m., I heard another sound. It wasn't tapping this time, nor the muffled crying. It was more subtle, but far more chilling. Footsteps. They were coming from the hallway, slow and uneven, like whoever was walking had a limp. Thump, shuffle, thump, shuffle. My stomach twisted in knots. My instinct screamed at me to lock the door, but I was frozen in place. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I braced myself for a knock or the sound of the handle turning, but all I heard was silence. A silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. After what felt like an eternity, I mustered the courage to peek through the peephole. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hesitated for a moment longer, then slowly leaned in to look. What I saw nearly made me jump out of my skin. There was no one there. The hallway was completely empty, except for a long shadow stretching across the floor. It didn't move, and I couldn't see what was casting it. I shut my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Maybe it was time to leave this place. I don't know where I found the courage to open the door, but I did. With sweaty hands and my heart racing, I turned the knob as quietly as I could. The hallway was empty, just as I'd seen through the peephole. But the shadow was still there, stretched across the floor. It didn't budge. I scanned the corridor, looking for any logical explanation, but there was nothing. I quickly shut the door and locked it again, feeling the sweat trickling down my neck. Back in the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think rationally. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the light was casting some strange effect in the hallway. But the unease in my chest wouldn't go away. The sense that something was terribly wrong was almost suffocating. I decided I wasn't going to wait until morning to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and headed for my car. But just as I reached the door, I heard the sound again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from the window. Frozen in place, I turned my head slowly. The thin curtain was slightly swaying, but there was no breeze. All I could see was my own distorted reflection in the dark glass, lit faintly by the bedside lamp. I swallowed hard and stepped back, unable to take my eyes off the window. The sound came again, louder this time. It was like nails scraping against the glass. I didn't think twice. I bolted for the door, ran through the dim hallway and made my way to the parking lot. When I reached my car, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a deep scratch along the side of it, as if someone had dragged a knife or a key with deliberate force. It hadn't been there before. I crouched to get a closer look, and that's when I noticed the footprints in the dirt around the car. They were small, almost childlike, and scattered in circles, as if someone had been walking around it repeatedly. My stomach dropped. I jumped into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine, desperate to get out of there. As I drove down the empty highway, I tried to piece together what had just happened. The tapping, the crying, the shadow in the hallway, the scratches on my car, none of it made sense. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see something or someone following me. The feeling of being watched didn't fade, even after I'd put miles between myself and that motel. It felt like whatever it was had stuck with me. As dawn broke, I stopped at a gas station to refuel and clear my head. When I stepped out of the car, something made me freeze. On the hood of my car, etched into the layer of dust, were finger marks. 4 long, thin fingers, as if someone had dragged their hand across the surface while I was driving. At that point, I didn't know what to think anymore. I got back into the car and kept driving, determined to put as much distance as possible between me and that place. For the next few days, I avoided talking about what happened. I was afraid people would think I was crazy or making it all up. But since that night, I've never stayed at another roadside motel. It's just not worth the risk. Whatever happened that night, I still can't explain it. Maybe it was my tired mind playing tricks on me, but those marks on my car were real. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when everything is quiet, I think I hear it again. Tap, tap, tap. When that happens, I just sit still, trying not to breathe too loudly. I still don't know if I'm truly safe. I never thought something like this could happen to me. I've been working as a courier for 2 years, driving around the city delivering packages from one point to another. It was just an ordinary summer day. Clear skies, moderate traffic. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. My shift had started at 7 a.m., and by around 3 p.m., I was already down to the last packages of the day. This time of day always makes me anxious to finish up, get home, and enjoy a well-deserved shower. But that day, something made me take a little longer at each stop. You know that weird feeling that something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's what stayed with me all day. My routine is pretty methodical. Park, grab the package from the back seat, drop it at the door, and move on to the next address. But that day, after about 3 deliveries, I noticed a black car, an older model, that always seemed to be on the same street where I stopped. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, maybe someone waiting for someone else. But when I stopped to deliver a package downtown and saw the same car turning the corner as I left, I started to feel uneasy. It was a sedan with tinted windows, the kind that stands out for looking out of place in residential neighborhoods. My mind started coming up with theories. Maybe it was just paranoia. After all, who would care about a simple delivery guy? Still, just in case, I decided to pay closer attention. To confirm my suspicions, I made a small change to my route. Instead of heading straight to the next address, I took a few extra turns down side streets pretending to be lost or dealing with a glitchy GPS. And there it was again, the same car turning a corner behind me, keeping a steady distance. My heart started racing. You know when adrenaline kicks in and you try to convince yourself everything's fine? That's exactly how I felt. When I got to the second-to-last address, I was almost sure it wasn't a coincidence. The car parked across the street as I stepped out with the package. A man sat in the driver's seat, but the dark windows made it hard to see clearly. I knew I had to act normal, so I tried to stay calm while delivering the package and walking back to the van. I glanced discreetly in the rearview mirror, and sure enough, the car followed me again. It wasn't paranoia anymore. They were following me. My gut told me something was very wrong. My last delivery was in a narrow alley, one of those places where the GPS makes you second-guess if you're in the right spot. I've always hated deliveries in places like that because alleys usually don't have much room to maneuver, and the feeling of being cornered is never good. I parked the van as close as possible to the building entrance and got out with the package. Even though I tried to act normal, my hands were so sweaty that the package kept slipping slightly from my grip. Before knocking on the door, I glanced back. The same black car was now parked at the alley's entrance, completely blocking the exit. Whatever was happening, it was about to unfold. I left the package at the door and knocked. No one answered. That's when I heard the sound of car doors opening. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. 2 men got out of the car. The first one was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a black baseball cap that partially hid his face. The second was shorter but had an expression that sent a chill down my spine, like he was sizing me up with every move I made. They walked toward me, not in a rush, as if they already knew I had nowhere to go. I tried to convince myself this might be a misunderstanding, but my gut screamed otherwise. When they got close enough, the taller one spoke first. "I think you delivered something by mistake. We're here to pick up the right package." The way he said it left no room for negotiation. It was more like a command than a request. I tried explaining that I didn't know of any mistakes, but he cut me off. "We know it's in there. Just grab it and hand it over and no one gets hurt." My legs were trembling and my mind was racing, trying to figure out an escape. They didn't look like the kind of people who would take no for an answer. My mind was a mess, but one thing was clear. I needed to get out of there. Thinking quickly, I said, "All right, I'll grab the package from the van." I walked back to the van slowly, feeling their eyes burning into my back. I opened the side door and pretended to search for something while my brain scrambled for a plan. I had to decide. Try stalling for more time or leave the package behind and get out of there as fast as I could. While pretending to look for something in the van, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in the alley. The two men stood just a few feet away, watching me like predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every second felt like an eternity, and I knew I didn't have much time. Finally, I grabbed one of the packages still in the van and held it up, pretending it was what they wanted. It was just an ordinary box, still sealed with the company's tape, but they didn't seem to care. "Here it is," I said, trying to sound calm, though my voice came out shaky. The taller man took a few steps toward me and snatched the box from my hands without even glancing at the label. "This is what we came for," he said, his tone more menacing than relieved. I knew I needed to put distance between us as quickly as possible. I stepped back, inching toward the driver's door. "Thanks for cooperating," he added, though there wasn't a shred of gratitude in his voice, just cold calculation. Then the shorter man leaned into the van slightly, as if checking to see if there was anything else worth taking. I didn't wait to find out what they'd do next. As soon as the taller man turned his back to head toward the car, I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so much that I almost stalled the van, but I managed to pull away. I barely had time to take a breath before I heard the roar of their engine behind me. They were following again. The narrow, winding streets of the alley didn't give me much of an advantage, but I tried to stay calm and keep control of the van as I swerved around corners, constantly checking my rearview mirror. Their car was dangerously close, like they wanted to scare me even more. Finally, I reached a busy avenue, where the traffic and open space worked in my favor. When I glanced in the mirror again, the black car was gone. It was like it had vanished into thin air. My nerves were shot, and all I wanted was to find somewhere safe. I drove straight to the nearest police station without stopping to think. When I explained everything to the officers, they seemed concerned but admitted there wasn't much they could do at that moment. They said I'd done the right thing by leaving the package and escaping unharmed, but that didn't make the experience any less terrifying. After explaining everything to the police, they asked me to wait while they checked the details of the package I had handed over. One officer mentioned that incidents involving delivery vans were becoming more common, but the behavior of the men I described seemed more deliberate and organized than a random robbery. That only made me feel worse. While I waited, I sent a message to my supervisor explaining what had happened and asking for advice. He replied almost immediately, telling me not to worry about the package and that my safety was the priority. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something unfinished. The officers returned after some time and said they would investigate, but they admitted it would be hard to track the car with the limited information I had provided. The area's cameras weren't working, and the package itself was just a standard item with nothing unusual in the company's records. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. I had escaped, but those men were still out there, probably planning something else, and the thought of that left a lingering unease. In the days that followed, I tried to get back to my routine, but the memory of that day stayed fresh in my mind. I started avoiding deliveries in alleys or isolated areas, even if it meant going out of my way or taking extra time. I also became more paranoid, constantly checking my mirrors and making sure no one was following me. My coworkers laughed when I told them the story, joking that I should be in an action movie, but I knew it had been real. The fear I felt wasn't something you could make up. To this day, I don't know who those men were, or what was in the package they were so determined to get. Maybe it was something important. Or maybe they just wanted to intimidate someone they thought was an easy target. What I do know is that the experience completely changed how I view my job. What used to be a simple routine now comes with a constant shadow of doubt. And every time I see a black car with tinted windows, my heart skips a beat, even if just for a moment. I never want to go through something like that again.